So I would like to quote one Sanskrit word that is called Prakriti Rakshati Rakshita. I am taking it from my friend Pankaj. That is nature, Mother Nature protects if she is protected. And I would like to quote one example, and that is that when we borrow a book from library and we read it and then in a very protected form we return it to the library so that it can be preserved for our children, grandchildren. Keeping in view of this fact, because time is very limited, I like to take the privilege to invite first speaker.
This final session of the day has been titled Sustainability Solutions. But when I reflect back on the sessions that I've heard today, it seems to me that sustainability as an idea, as a concept, has been deeply embedded really into everything that we have been hearing. And unfortunately, I wasn't here for all of the afternoon sessions, but I was for the morning before lunch. And I wanted to share just a few reflections before I start my presentation on some of the ideas that I felt very powerful around this concept of sustainability. So we heard from Mr. Navneet Narayan from Haldia, and he was talking about the supply chain shocks that India has been feeling since the war in the Strait of Hormuz. He revealed that 50% of India's feedstock for plastic comes from that region. And this has created a huge need for India to diversify where its feedstock comes from. And clearly, one of the solutions to that diversification is going to be to look for recycling rather than relying on virgin materials. India produces 10 million tons of plastic waste a year. That is a huge resource that can drive that diversification push. We heard from Mr. Vikram Badaria from Alok Master Batches talking about India's growing web of trade relationships. He singled out Europe with its 450 million consumers as a very important market. But if India wants to compete in Europe, you're going to have to become masters of circularity, because the rules there are mandating the inclusion of recycled plastic in all the packaging as of 2030, as indeed is happening here in India. We heard from Mr. Sumit Basu from Indian Oil. He identified 3 structural shifts that are going to reshape the polyolefin market.
We're talking a little bit about the crisis in West Asia and how that's impacting Indian packaging. So I'll just start with an interesting tweet that I saw the other day. So it said the worst thing about a 2-week war in the Middle East is the first 10 years, which I think is very apt. So currently where we are is we have a deal that's supposedly signed, though we had attacks this weekend. I think we're very skeptical that this deal will hold, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. The reason being is that there are too many parties with differing incentives that make it very difficult for this deal to hold. That said, today the market is pricing oil as though the deal is done. But we feel that this is actually, it is a bit too, dovish, and we don't really believe this will hold. The biggest issue that we have now is that so far we've had oil has reached $120 a barrel. And it's still not reached the worst of what people have expected, which is, $150, $180, $200. And a large part of that is that globally we've had a decent amount of oil inventories. The challenge that we have now is that oil inventories are starting to wear thin. So the issue is, if this war doesn't stop and the Hormuz Strait is closed again, we may see a much worse impact than what we saw, at the start of March and, going into April. Why this matters for us is packaging is essentially an energy business. It's crude all the way through. And, essentially as, converters, what we're doing is we're taking oil, it just happens to be in the form of plastic pellets. We're doing some conversion and selling it. So essentially we are just an energy business. For most of the converters, I think same for Vaibhav, would be that, 60 to 70% of our cost is material, which is largely driven by oil.
Simple, and I think most of you here would agree with me. But I want to basically state that as a plastic fraternity, as a community that we all are, it's our joint responsibility to keep reinstating that plastic is not the problem. We can reinstate it to ourselves, to our peers, to our families, to our children, them to their schools, to our societies, until we are able to convince one and all that plastic is not a problem. So we are witnessing the making of a new India, and I think Elite has put that very well, an India that manufactures, innovates, and leads. If that future is to be sustainable, it has to be built on facts, not misconception. Plastic is not the problem. So why do we invent? We invent to solve problems and make our life easier. Plastics has done just that, and it's done so fantastically. It is our greatest invention. Plastic was never the problem. It is what we actually did with it. What the world believes and what science shows point in opposite directions. We often hear about the evil of plastics, but science proves the opposite. Now let me show you some images depicting this paradox. Can you believe? These are real ads promoted by an Indian newspaper. They brand the material itself like a killer. Zero facts, only opinions. Today, everyone is talking about energy security and saving fuel. If we replace plastics, we would be using at least 2 times more energy in the alternative.
Steam or put in the drop boxes which are right there across the venue.